Hi, my name is Bob Mazey, and I'm the president of the New Jersey Agents Alliance. And welcome to another edition in our ongoing series of interviews with key thought leaders in the insurance space. But before I introduce our first guest for today's interview session, I'd like to make a special shout out to Utica National Insurance Company. Utica National Insurance Company has been a wonderful partner of the Alliance and is truly committed to the independent insurance agency channel in New Jersey. So thank you to Utica National, and we'll begin. Today I'd like to introduce Hal Soden, the Soden Agency, and I'd like to talk with Hal today about demystifying workers' compensation. You know, workers' compensation is a pretty common coverage per se, but I think it's probably also pretty confusing to some buyers. So we'd like to sort of spend a few minutes, if we could, to demystify the rumors about workers' comp. You okay with that?
Sounds good to me.
Excellent, thanks. So let's just start with demystifying the rumors. First question, is workers' compensation mandatory or optional in New Jersey? Is this a nice to have or a gotta have?
Sure. So the most important thing I'll mention is if you have an employee, it is mandatory. Okay. As soon as you have a single employee, you are required to have workers' compensation insurance. Now, there are some situations where you don't have an employee and you may need workers' compensation insurance.
Okay.
And that would be if you are a corporation, not an LLC, but a corporation.
Okay.
Your officers may be required to have workers' comp, or will be, at least in New Jersey, required to have workers' compensation.
Okay.
But if you're an LLC, for example, or an individual, an LLC, the managing members, if they're the only people that work for that company, they can go without workers' compensation.
Okay, so would that be a voluntary choice of theirs, or?
For the LLC, yes, that'd be a voluntary choice.
Okay.
Voluntary choice.
Right,
Yeah.
so if they wanted to be in, they could elect in.
Sure, they could elect to have coverage, for sure.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So in a nutshell, high level, what does workers' compensation cover and not cover?
Sure. So the main workers' compensation is for your employees. It's really, employers are mandated to get it for their employees, and so really the coverage is meant for them. There is a medical element to it, and there's a disability element to it. And so that's the main portion of the workers' comp benefits. There's also something called employer's liability, but the main portion that most people think of for workers' compensation is the workers' compensation benefits.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
which are meant to indemnify or to make whole your employee when they're injured.
Gotcha. So it seems that some people confuse medical insurance with workers' comp because obviously both policies cover medical bills, but what's the difference in things like coverage triggers, exclusions, so on and so forth? So are these coverages interchangeable? Is one a replacement for the other, or are there two different applications for both coverages?
Sure. No, definitely two different applications.
Okay.
Workers' comp is meant for injuries at work.
Okay.
Where medical insurance conceivably could be injuries anywhere. But the first thing that's going to happen when you walk into an emergency room or something, they're going to ask you whether you were in an auto accident or whether you were injured at work. And if you're injured in work, they're going to say that is workers' compensation. You should have workers' compensation insurance. And that's the insurance that's going to trigger.
Okay.
If it's something that happened at home or outside of work, that's where medical insurance should come into play.
Gotcha. But so having a little experience in my life going to an emergency room, and you have to fill out that paper.
Yep.
While you're sitting there bleeding or in pain. They ask you to stop, and fill out paper. I always see that question, did this happen at work? Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me like that's the point at which the medical provider knows if this is going to be a workers' comp claim or perhaps a medical insurance claim.
Right. And which can be confusing, especially if it is somebody where it happened at work, but they're a managing member of a company. They could say it did happen at work, and they'll say, well, this has to be workers' compensation. And they might have a little bit of back and forth before they figure out, okay, well, they don't have workers' compensation. It has to go by to their medical insurance.
Gotcha. So just to take it maybe one step further, I also noticed when you go to a medical provider, they ask whether or not it's been an auto accident or not. So can you talk a little bit about why that question is important?
Sure.
And what that means, because doesn't no-fault insurance in New Jersey auto insurance also cover medical bills?
For an auto accident, sure.
For an auto accident. Okay, so we're talking about work-related injuries, auto-related injuries,
Yes.
and then health insurance industries. So just snap a chalk line between those three so people can understand where each of those coverages apply?
Sure. So any accident or injury involved in an auto accident, actually, even if you're a pedestrian with an auto accident, there's something called PIP in New Jersey. Again, other states differ, and your PIP coverage or your medical coverage for you would kick in, and that's what that insurance is for. I don't know how far we want to get with this, but there's ways where you can make health insurance primary or secondary to PIP coverage. It can get fairly complicated, but that's, again, why you would speak to somebody like us about your insurance. So.
Right. No, it's interesting that you say that because obviously insurance is available in so many different mediums today, online and apps and, you name it. But it does seem like there's lots of things to know about how each coverage applies. And I think that's where an independent agency such as yourself really adds value to the equation so people can sort of, sort out where these coverages all apply.
For sure. It can be definitely difficult to navigate. And, that's why there's a pretty high training. There's a lot of training involved for a new insurance agent. It takes quite a bit of time before they're proficient enough to understand the difference of the coverages.
Right. Gotcha. Great. So we hear a lot about companies, whether it be general contractors or technology companies that like to use independent contractors or independent consultants. And a lot of times in order to get that work, that general contractor or that technology company, whatever the case might be, requires workers' compensation evidence from their subs or their independent contractors. So why is that?
Sure. So there's two reasons why that would be. The first one would be a coverage reason. So they don't want to, they want, for if their subcontractor gets injured, for their subcontractor's workers' compensation policy to apply, because otherwise their insurance policy would end up paying for their subcontractor's injuries. So that's partially the reason. The second reason is when it comes to time for an insurance audit at the end of the year, if your subcontractors are uninsured without workers' compensation, you're going to be charged for their premiums on your policy, which can be a pretty rude awakening, especially if you're subcontracting something like roofing or some other sort of higher hazard classification, workers' compensation. You're not expecting to get this giant bill at the end of the year. It's very important that you obtain certificates of insurance. You have a subcontractor management plan, and again, your agent broker can help you with that.
Okay, gotcha. So if I hear you correctly, workers' compensation is a mandatory coverage in New Jersey, so it's a compliance matter. So are the rates all the same, and how does an employer know if they're paying the right rate? Are there other mechanisms available to modify the premium or discount the premium? Sure.
So there is a misconception. So one thing is true, that the rates for each classification, New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, in New Jersey, other states make it for their state, sets the rates for each classification of business. So an electrician will have this rate, a carpenter will have this rate, an office worker would have another rate. But from there's a lot of things that can happen from credits to debits to dividends, and of course your experience modification that can affect your premium. So workers' comp can swing wildly from being credited 25, 30% to debited a similar amount. So there's actually a big difference in what your premium could end up being, even though it's all based on that initial rate. The rate is modified by all these different factors.
Gotcha. It sounds encouraging that there's ways to reduce the premium, but it also sounds kind of daunting to figure out how to access all those debits and credits. So it sounds to me like a good professional insurance agent that knows sort of how to navigate these different credits and debits and such is an important part of making that choice.
For sure.
Yeah, great. So as we begin to wrap up, what are some of the things that people wouldn't know about workers' comp, or things that would surprise a client about workers' comp? So we've talked about medical expense coverage. I understand there's also lost wage coverage, but what about in the event of a workplace injury? There was recently an article that I read that the au pair of a family out in, I think, somewhere in the Midwest was involved in an auto accident, got severely injured, and received over an $11 million award for her permanent injuries. So was that a workers' comp payment, or was that did that payment come from somewhere else?
It most likely. So I hope it was a workers' comp payment, because
Yes.
if it wasn't a workers' comp payment, it could have come from somewhere else, meaning their pockets or their investments. So I hope that it was a workers' comp payment.
Right.
Sure.
Okay. Great. No, I appreciate that. Again, Hal, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this morning. What seems to be a simple coverage isn't really so simple, and it sounds like there's a lot of trapdoors and other options that you might not be able to get online or through an app. So I think let me just ask one more question. Does the cost of workers' comp change whether a client uses an independent agent such as yourself that sort of knows how to navigate these credits and debits and so on and so forth? Or is it cheaper to go online?
Sure. So I'm sure there's the perception that it might be cheaper to go online, but I'd say especially for workers' compensation, that's unlikely to be the case. The reason being is an insurance agent, whose profession is to work with your workers' compensation policy, is going to understand the types of available credits, debits, dividend plans, and also is going to help you control your experience mod. And again, your experience mod is basically a number. It can be 1, which it's not usually, but it can be under 1 or over 1 that modifies your premium, and anything from your claims. So basically, it's figured out by I'm oversimplifying this tremendously. Comparing claims to premium. Okay, and if you have higher claims per premium than the average company, then your mod will be over 1. If you have better claims experience, then your mod will be under 1. Okay, and what a good insurance agent or broker is going to do is going to work with you, whether it be safety, whether it be for return to work type programs and other things, to help you control that mod so that you're paying less, especially over the long term.
Right. Great. Well, it sounds to me, if I needed workers' comp, I would use an independent agent, and I would call your agency to help me navigate through that. So on that note, how is it best for people to connect with you and reach your agency?
Sure. So, we online, you could we just said, be careful online, but you could reach out to us initially that way.
Okay. They'll still get the same service?
Yes. We have the website, sodeninsurance.com. They can reach out, email, hwsoden@sodeninsurance.com, or by telephone. So
that's great. Yeah. Well, thank you for spending the time with us. Also, thanks to, again, Utica National for sponsoring this series. And I appreciate your time, Hal, and everyone's time watching. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for watching.